Afternoon, John, and how are you today?
I'm good, thank you, Paul. Very good.
Nice to meet you eventually. We've been chatting on LinkedIn, and
yeah, it's good to finally get together.
I know we're not actually together, but it's still the same, isn't it? Nowadays, this is the next thing to meeting, isn't it?
Yeah. This is the next best thing, isn't it?
Exactly. So, John, whereabouts are you from?
I live in Bath, so I live in the southwest, but originally I'm from South Manchester,
Right.
from a little village called Timperley, which is sort of in the bottom bit of Manchester.
Right. So you're a long way from home. Is there a story
Yeah,
behind that?
it's not too bad. No, not really. Not really. Just moved around for work, really. There's part of working in energy is you end up in lots of different locations, don't you? There's lots of opportunities spread out, and they're not always necessarily in one place. So I've moved around lots of times for various reasons.
Excellent. So we've met through LinkedIn, and we've had some chat and discussions right there. So I know a little bit about yourself. But for the benefit of our audience today, can you give us some background to yourself and possibly your origin story, and maybe sort of why you've moved all the way around the country for the passion of your career?
Yeah, of course, Paul. I'm originally a mechanical engineer, so I trained in mechanical, and then I've worked in various jobs. Originally designing process plant and equipment and commissioning it, and then to work for one of the big power companies in combined heat and power, then moving around the country doing that in power stations, and then roles in safety, engineering safety, and then moving through into various infrastructure roles. So lots of variety, really. It's the energy industry has given me lots of different opportunities.
I'd like to pick up on CHP because that's one of my favorite technologies.
Yeah. I've worked a lot in CHP. Originally, I worked on plants that served various places. One was a salt factory, salt refining, and various other sort of bigger industrial CHPs, so a tire plant and things like that. So lots of different CHPs there, typically with gas turbines in, so around about sort of the 40-50 megawatt size. And then later on, actually, I worked in district heating where we had lots of little CHPs, sort of half megawatts,
right,
up to about 2, all over the country. So yeah, lots of CHP.
Right.
It's quite a good. It is a positive. If you've got lots of heat demand, it's a great technology, isn't it?
Exactly.
Not so good if you haven't got lots of heat demand.
So if you've got the heat demand, and we've got these significant prices at the moment, energy prices, and there's ways of financing these CHPs on like a discounted energy price. That is an amazing model. The only conflict nowadays, we've got the net zero approach. It doesn't really give us net zero, does it? Even though it does give us a carbon saving, there's still the conflict around that currently. I'm hoping that we're going to find a way through that if we can find better resources to generate these CHPs. I think that's the future, basically. Hydrogen, maybe. Biomass doesn't work so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's biomass. No. Yeah, you get a bit of biomass now, don't you? Not much biomass CHP, although some bigger ones, I guess.
Yeah. Have you done any? Sorry, John. Have you done any biomass?
Have
you done any biomass?
One of the plants I was involved in was up in Sheffield, where there was that was a lot of biomass, and then there was a district heating network on the tail end of that, heading out into Sheffield. So, but that was larger scale. There isn't. It's actually quite. We spent a lot of time. I spent a lot of time looking at biomass CHP, and it's quite hard to make work at smaller scales. The technology isn't quite, because you need a steam turbine really to make it work. Then puts you into proper steam pressures and some really quite high pressured steam, and actually just in terms of the engineering management of biomass CHP is quite hard. I know some people have used open Rankine cycle, haven't they?
Right.
To try and do it, but I believe the ORCs give out lots and lots of heat, so you need a lot of heat demand to make an ORC biomass plant work.
Right.
But yeah, you think biomass, and it's a good point you make though. Is how do you make interim steps on that carbon journey, or do you jump to the end? How do you jump to the end when you don't know what the end's going to be?
Exactly.
And this kit is designed to last as well. These aren't short-term decisions, are they? When you talk about CHP, you're buying plant that lasts 20 years here. So and actually 20 years now is 2040, 2043. It's quite incredible, isn't it?
It's sort of exceeded past, we've got 2030 and 2050. It's right in the middle, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So plant decisions you make now, you pay forever, really, don't you? So people are always, I think, worried about those decisions where they end up with an element of regret.
Yeah. But for me, the decision now is making the savings up against, we've seen energy increases of 400% plus. So, those with CHP should be in a very good position. But, as long as the CHP is running, I'd done a famous presentation once, and it was called "A CHP Isn't Just for Christmas," because, people are putting CHPs in and walking away. You can't. You've got to manage them. They're a lorry engine basically sitting there waiting to fail. So they, even the ones, specifically that only run for certain times of the day, they need, a stalled engine or stopped engine needs to be restarted. So it's not just, let's put some, well, it's like all energy technology really, isn't it? You can't just put the stuff in and walk away.
Yeah, and I think you've also, the bit I really learned a lot around that world was about balancing the system. And actually, it's not just about installing a box in the corner that does something. It's about how that energy is then distributed around the system. Is it at the right temperature?
Yeah.
How are you storing energy in the, because a lot of CHPs are put in with a store, aren't they, where you've got a nice tank of water or something nearby to try and smooth it out.
Yeah.
But actually, what they're not always designed perfectly, and often the people lots of times try and design systems for the highest load case rather than the average.
Yeah,
because nobody wants to run out of heat, do they, for anything they're doing? And so, but often you end up sort of working somewhere that's a bit inefficient rather than the optimum, the most efficient solution. You see, so I think often people end up a bit disappointed actually as they put in high efficiency kit, or they put in kit that they think is going to save them a fortune.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't actually quite operate as efficiently as they'd like. And I think that's quite common with those kind of technologies, is there's sort of a bit of buyer's regret. Like this was meant to be amazing. And then it kind of doesn't quite work because it's often oversized, or the storage doesn't stratify quite as much as they'd like, or the radiators really needed a bit hotter or a bit cool, or whatever it is. It just doesn't quite work. That whole energy thing, that whole system thinking needs to really go into it.
No one had predicted COVID right in the middle of the installation.
Yeah, exactly.
And no one had predicted the change or the changes that we're up against,
Absolutely. And then the changes of the way, I'm sure now in office buildings, people are thinking, well, actually, should I be bothering heating them on a Friday? And so actually the payback goes down.
Exactly.
Actually, people are in a bit less. So it's interesting, isn't it? Interesting sector. And the low carbon route there, is it hydrogen? There's a lot in the news at the moment about whether you'd pump hydrogen around for heating. One of the things actually you sort of, those kind of solutions do help you with is that you can change it at point source rather than having lots of boilers around a network. Potentially, if you can do one single CHP or something, I guess you've got a nice easy. You've got what do I say? Nice. You've got an easier switch over, haven't you?
Exactly.
Changing lots.
Exactly.
So.
I'm just conscious that we've jumped straight in.
Oh no,
we've
it's great,
gone straight in, Lee, straight into the deep end regarding this CHP.
CHP.
So you're mechanical, I'm electrical. So we're both in there. I'm wiring it all up. You're sort of screwing bolting everything together. We've solved all the problems of the world regarding energy management, haven't we?
Exactly.
Just CHP. I'll connect it to the mains. You connect it to the pipework.
Exactly. Just plumb it. I'll plumb it in.
Harmony.
Yeah.
Harmony. So tell us a bit more about yourself regarding, how long you've been in the industry and when did you start?
I've been in the industry for, let me think, 20 odd years, 20 plus years. So I started straight out of university from doing mechanical. I went straight into the energy sector. I worked for engineering consulting contractors down in London, which was great. great experience to actually do design work and actually go and see stuff I'd designed or drawn up being built. And yeah, and so I did that first. So I've got 20 years, and then since then, really, I've managed to move around and work for different companies, and you know, you build up a great network across the energy sector, and it's right. Yeah, I've worked right at the sort of the end of it in the refining bit, and then right down through into actually going into buildings and apartment blocks, and I've sat with customers and talked about heating stuff that's gone wrong. So I've really seen it end to end, which has been fabulous. Really, it's been great. Yeah.
I've got empathy with that because I've done the same, but so it does really make a big difference regarding when you talk about energy and and what you can give back, I think. So you followed the whole spectrum of energy, is what I say in my industry. Where's been your sort of, what's your drivers regarding it? Is it about energy management and the green element of it, or is it about the money? Where do you sit regarding that side of it?
For me, I think it's about the role it has to play in making people's lives better, actually. So I think energy is this common thread through so much of what we do, that being able to talk about it well and understand how it interplays with it, even at a very, very local level, how, you know, when you talk about money, you know, actually the impact it has on people just because of the cost of it. And at the consumer end, how much people understand it is really important, because actually, if you can understand it and work with it and make good decisions, you can keep your costs down, which gives you money to spend on other stuff. But actually, what I find fascinating about the whole subject of energy is actually you can go backwards from there. And it's like an onion that, yeah, you've got your little local issues with energy, and then you can grow out from that, and you can think about, well, actually, how does it get to me? So you've got all the infrastructure bits. So how do we move energy around? How do we generate it? How do we make it? So locally, like, how do we turn it into something usable? So turning it into electricity. And then you go out to that until you get to this global issue that actually, well, where do we get it from? What all these different sources? And then you get into, then it gets really fascinating, doesn't it? Because you've gone from your little local thing about, well, how do I use less electricity, or how do I use less gas, or actually, do I even burn gas? Going back to our previous conversation. But actually, what you're having a conversation there that started a long way away with somebody digging some coal out of the ground, or producing some oil, or making a solar panel, you know, digging some silicon, you know, processing silicon to make a solar panel. You know, you've got this incredibly complex end-to-end topic that back into the way people live their lives all over the globe. And I find it absolutely fascinating that something that as a thread that you can pull through has so many different interactions, and that's why I'm always passionate about talking about it, because I think you can, when you think about energy, you can influence locally and globally, and now even more so when you talk about sustainability, because nobody's you can't deny the environmental impact of energy use, and that can be local as well as global. You know, that can be air pollution, that can be carbon dioxide, and I think being able to have a really good quality conversation about energy is something that really all of us, all engineers, should be able to do. And that's not just how you should do a small thing, you know, like you said, you're electrical, you know, we electrical and mechanical with our fitting our CHP. But actually, what matters is when we're thinking about it. Okay, and I think your point there was, well, what happens with CHP when we decarbonize? Because it doesn't answer it, does it?
No.
And this is where often when I talk about energy, and it's great to come on here with yourself, Paul, because actually one of the things I try and do is try and talk about it in a sense of this middle ground, I think. And by a middle ground, I just mean being willing to accept that something isn't necessarily the perfect answer or perfect solution. and that what we're dealing with is a number of imperfects.
Yeah.
Where we'll get to probably an imperfect solution problem, but actually it's really important that you recognize the imperfections.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you
and again,
I always say
and a bit like with your CHP.
Yeah.
I guess it's a bit like with your CHP is because there's an awful lot of people out there who go out and sell single products as if they're the answer. And it really winds me up because there is no such thing as a free lunch anywhere in energy. There is nothing perfect.
No.
Nobody is yet to find 100% zero carbon, zero guilt, zero environmental impact source of energy. And when they do, they'll do fabulously well out of it. And I think it's so important that some people in the middle ground of energy are able to just have that, be able to say, yeah, okay, I get that. And I get the marketing. That you're saying that your bit of it is great. But I think you're a client in the world of energy and in the B2B sense, it must be utterly baffling because there's 100 different people telling you that their thing is perfect.
Exactly.
And will be perfect in 2050.
Yeah.
When it's patently not true.
Yeah. That's where, so I break that down into technology and widgets. So all these people who do widgets telling you that's the best thing ever. And then you got the technologies, which are the best thing, not the best thing ever, but they're a good thing, but they all contribute. It's all about contribution. And then I was just going to say that I see it as a three-pronged approach. So we've got energy management. You can't just solve any problem with energy management alone. We've then got renewables out there regarding, so I don't see that as energy management because energy management is the demand side. So once we're using it, we need to use it better, but then there's the supply side, which is the renewables, solar, wind, whatever measures we look at. And then there's the environmental side, because we need to be reviewing, planting trees. We need to be looking about how we recycle plastics, etc. It all contributes, doesn't it? And that, you're right when you're saying, when you start that, when you're talking just then, I'm thinking of a mind map and we're drawing out all these different, and that can go off and off. And we would never be able to get granular. You wouldn't be able to write small enough to get granular into it because each area requires experts. And, you and I we class ourselves as experts, but not physical experts in every single line item. I can talk about these areas, but I can't boast to be an expert in, for instance, procurement of energy. How do we procure it? I've got an understanding of it, but I wouldn't want to be doing that day in, day out. It's just impossible to do that. That I'm with you. This is why I think the industry is so exciting because it's so wide. And I think that keeps us all stimulated. I've been in the industry, I'm a little bit older than you, 42 years. So when I left school, nuclear power, that's really got me excited about the industry, starting to generate it and hearing those turbines spinning and screaming away. So do you have an opinion on climate change and what you're doing every day towards climate change? Or are you the middle ground regarding that as well?
I mean, I think personally, there is as a society, we need to do everything we can to try and reduce our impact on the world we all live on. There's 8 billion of us on this planet, all making an impact. Mm-hmm. And so I personally think the onus is on us to do as much. I don't actually think there is a middle ground on climate change. I think there's an importance to recognize the transition and the transition that we're going through. And to move in as quickly as possible, or to move quickly is important. But I think there has to be a recognition of the nature of the transition. We are a very energy and hydrocarbon driven society. And I think we have some big challenges ahead of us. And that's why it's really important to not sort of state that something is the answer or oversell certain things, and actually recognize that it's going to be difficult. There are going to be consequences to decisions, and that we need to progress technology as quickly as possible to get there. And also, I think also to recognize the global nature of the problem. It's not, I think it's very easy. I think there's an onus to try and reduce carbon as much as possible. But again, it's really important to not outsource it.
Yeah.
It's very easy to just outsource it to somebody else that uses a very high carbon source of energy and sort of think that you've done your bit. And I think it's really important to think holistically about it as an issue and to see it as a global issue. And we're all very, very interconnected on this planet now. So absolutely, I don't think there is a middle ground on it as an issue, and I think it is an issue that will dominate the next 30 years on our planet as we learn to live with the impacts of climate change and also try and reduce our impact on the planet we're on.
Yeah. What amazed me is the impact that was made through COVID. You mentioned COVID earlier, and how things very quickly started to be nice, wasn't it? You know, the sea, well, I live near the beach, and that beach overnight become a green flag. You know, it's so beautiful, so clear. We walked out to see when the tide went out. It was like we felt we was in another country. It was unbelievably clean and beautiful out there. The air was better. People weren't suffering so much with hay fever and things. The skies, the sounds, massive difference overnight. So it can be done, can't it, very quickly, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing what people can achieve when they put their minds to it, isn't it? I think it's where, COVID really showed what could be achieved when people are faced with a big challenge.
Yeah.
And I think in energy, when you talk about behavioral change, it's amazing actually. I think about COVID and I think about, well, what would have happened in the pre-Microsoft Teams world and Zoom world? You know, all of a sudden we all went, oh, look, we can have a meeting, we can do podcasts like this. Probably we wouldn't have done this before COVID.
No, we wouldn't have done. Wouldn't have done at all.
And it's amazing how technology can be such an enabler to that change. And I was thinking about this recently with the demand response reductions for peak times, you know, getting people to log onto their app and click on a button to say, yeah, I'm in, I'll do that. And hundreds of thousands of people getting behind something that without technology, you wouldn't have even dreamed of thinking about. You know, 10 years ago, you couldn't have even thought about that. You'd have probably ended up with the BBC reading an announcement and everybody panicking and turning their kettles on.
Well, we used to have faxes, didn't we? Once upon a time.
Yeah, exactly. We'll fax everybody.
Yeah, we fax everyone and tell them to curtail their energy.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's what gives an element of hope, actually, is that you've got this huge technology enabler, which changes things. And I think there's some big challenges. You've got some technology that helps you fix stuff. And I think there is a will. I think lots of people want to do more. And I think it's interesting in the sort of B2B energy sense, there's lots of people now, particularly with the costs, where the economic driver, and I think that's when we talk about energy a lot of the time, that the best kilowatt you get is the kilowatt you don't use. That's the most cost effective one usually.
One of my favorite sayings.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Suddenly, even at home, it focuses the mind, doesn't it? When and it does. I think what's really important though is that people in that, there's those people who can engage because they understand it, and there's those people who can engage because they can afford it, and that tends to be quite. And this includes businesses. Actually, is that there's a lot of people, individuals and businesses out there that I think struggle because they don't necessarily understand it. They perhaps don't even know how they could access the right money. And I think that's in an energy trend. I think it's really important to try and bring people along, isn't it? You know, and somehow give people the ability to make those decisions. Because I think often I see in the energy space, the people who are super engaged, it's the 10% of people who are super engaged, who are doing all the whizzy stuff and posting all the whizzy articles.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people out there who aren't going to be doing saving sessions and aren't going to be doing fitting batteries to their house easily, and they can't. So, people that rent, or there's lots of it's lots of whizzy stuff that gives you lots of hope as a society. It's how you then shove through behind
Yeah.
that and enable everybody to take part. We'll see it with electric vehicles.
We will, but I think also I like the fact that you don't need all the whizzy whiz stuff around you to make changes. You can do a lot of changes within your building and your house to make savings without spending too much money. That makes sense.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I've proven it myself. I've made lots of changes to my house regarding my energy. I've made massive differences. Yes, I'm in the know, but it doesn't take much to implement those. And I think it's the same for industry as well. I think there's a balance of doing that. So, John, you've been telling us about your career. Where's your career now? What impact are you making, or you're able to make in society now with your career?
Yeah, so I do so I run an infrastructure business now. So moving fuel around, which is interesting, it's different, and it's actually, when you think about the transition, it's really important to do that in a way that limits impact. Actually, there's always opportunities to save in whatever you do. And so actually, so there's lots of stuff there, but then also I try and share a lot of my ideas. I've written a book which I've published on the future of energy, which I've published every year or 2 years for the last. It's on its third iteration, where I try and share my ideas and try and share this middle sort of ground on. I don't like to, maybe middle ground's the wrong idea, but this sort of balanced view of I'm not going to sugarcoat this, and I'm not going to tell you something is the answer, because I don't know. I'm just going to tell you what this is and what the technology is, and actually where it could go in the current world. And so I've done that, and
what was the driver for that?
Ideas.
What was the driver for that?
Yeah, I was a bit bored really during lockdown, I'll be honest with you. And I'd been doing a bit of blogging, and I'd been sharing some ideas, and I thought, actually, I've written all these blogs. Each one starts to move towards being the chapter of a book. And so I looked at them, and I said, well, and I put quite a lot of work in to try and just each one into something. And then so I got a book out. I got some pretty positive feedback, and I thought, well, actually, I'll update it again, and I've grown it, and it's got better. In the third go round, it's better. It's a bit more, and really that's been my way of sort of sharing with the energy and it's, I say sharing with the energy community. Actually, it's deliberately written not for people that know all about it.
Yeah.
Because and I try and be really open and say this isn't written. If you're an energy expert and you've just swallowed a textbook that's 500 pages long, you'll get some opinion in here, but you're unlikely to get anything really new. But if you're new, if you're relatively new to it, or actually questions that you're too scared to ask, you might want to pick this up and just see. And so I tackle some of the gritty stuff around hydrogen. Actually, what are all these colors of hydrogen, and whether we even should call them different colors? Because I'm not convinced. I think it makes it more confusing than it needs to be. But no one's going to listen. I know it sounds, no one's going to listen to me and stop using colors of hydrogen. Do you know what I mean? So actually, I'll tell you what the colors of hydrogen are, and then I'll say what I think about that as a way of communicating it. And then similarly, looking at other technologies like geothermal and saying, well, why isn't geothermal bigger? Why isn't free energy? In fact, actually, when you think about, when we talked earlier about sort of low carbon free sources, I know they're not free, but sort of guilt-free sources of energy, geothermal is probably the closest. So why hasn't geothermal come through? It's certainly not low cost. I think that's probably the answer to that. And so I've got into sharing those ideas, and that's been great, because it's opened up some opportunities for me going to speak to some people, and I've tied that in with a lecture I do, a presentation I do, where I really hit for audience participation. I get people to vote without talking publicly about what they think. So I deliberately don't ask the audience the question. I ask them it via a private voting system to get people to actually come off the fence and share what they really think,
Right.
which is always contentious. And it's interesting.
Do you ever publish those results? Not the names of the people, but do you ever?
I haven't. Do you know, I use it in each one. Often I'll refer back and say, well, actually, this is where the average is coming on this now. And
it's interesting.
I haven't particularly, because I think one of the reasons I haven't shared them is I don't. Again, partly in my book, I try and push back on people coming out with bold statements that aren't backed up by science, or backed up by sort of too much fact. And and probably statistically, they probably wouldn't be a great number. You'd need to be really clear about what the number was, and so I probably should really. But it's interesting when you actually push people on things like hydrogen and the different technologies and where they think transportation will go.
Mm-hmm.
It's really interesting because people, if you get a room of sort of MBAs or a room of students and things, there's a lot of cynicism about hydrogen. So I deliberately draw that out, and then I say, yeah, but this is how much people have committed to this.
Right.
So do you want to go and tell them that none of you are sort of behind this?
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because often I always think it's really funny when the money doesn't follow opinion in these topics. I think it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, hydrogen, I think my personal take is on sort of hydrogen in the absence of other major in the absence of some of really credible and scalable alternatives, hydrogen is going to be needed somewhere in the system. I think just at the moment it's not clear. So that's sort of where I got to really. So what, just going back to your original question, because we drifted again, was really, it was a lockdown thing. It kept me entertained in lockdown, gave me something to do in the evenings. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the opportunity to get out and talk. I've spoken to people all over the world. People reach out.
Brilliant.
And sometimes they agree.
That's how we met.
Most of the time
we met because of that as well, didn't we?
Yeah.
So what are your
and it's great, and I love it.
John, what do you think your challenges are? You as an individual, where do you think your challenges are now?
It's a good one. I think
I like the way you smile every time I ask a question.
I know, yeah, exactly. That's thinking time, Paul. That's thinking time.
Yeah, I thought that.
Yeah, grimace. What are my challenges? I think it's the same for all of us actually in the energy profession. It's staying current. I see our world as a bit like working in computing. In the 90s, you'd have been there on your BBC Micro and said, yes, I'm all over this. I can program. What was the programming language? Basic. That was it. Basic. I can program Basic. I'm all over this now, and sort of keeping up with Google and and sites and the internet and YouTube and all that. And I think and it's actually, when you think about it, for everybody, 20 years ago we didn't have Facebook or LinkedIn, and now you and I probably think we're really current because we're on LinkedIn, but I find TikTok utterly baffling, for example. But I think in energy, the staying up to date and current and not getting pigeonholed into your groove, not getting into a groove where, and it's interesting, you go back to your where we started this whole conversation, where we got onto chatting about CHP, which is always fun, was actually there's lots of people out there still ploughing on selling CHPs.
100%.
Actually, it's great, good for them if it's working and it's the right technology for their clients. But I think as an energy professional, it's so broad now, it's so technology driven, and the change is so fast that you think about electric vehicles. Again, if you'd have asked us 3-4 years ago, we'd have sort of said, well, electric vehicles, I'm sure they'll be selling a few in a few years' time. And I'm sure you are regularly talking to people about coping with EV charging. it's a massive issue. And 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about putting in megawatt supply points into office buildings. I think we'd have flagged it and said, yeah, that's coming. You might want to start thinking about that. But now it's real, isn't it? People are turning up at hotels.
We would have done. I don't think we would have done.
People are turning up at hotels now expecting to charge.
Exactly.
And I've got 2 EVs and I find it infuriating. I go to places now and I'm outraged that I can't charge. And it's such a difference, isn't it? And in how many years is that? 36 months?
Yeah.
Amazing.
I've got visions. So how many times do you leave your house? I've got visions of how many times do you leave your house and you haven't charged your phone? And then I've got visions of walking around with my cable thinking, oh, I need to plug this in somewhere. That's going to be exactly the same for the car, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
but it'll come. I think that the benefit is the demand is there. And so the investment case comes now. And that was always the problem with EV charging, was actually the investment case wasn't there. Whereas now, actually, it is coming, it is real, people are looking for it. And actually, people seem to not mind paying a reasonable price per kilowatt of energy. You know, it's so yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But again, when you think about the energy world, and I think that probably, I think my point there about staying current is so important. And actually that's partly why, and I think it's probably why you do these podcasts, because each person that comes on, you take away something personally as well, and you think, oh, I learned something. I didn't expect to learn that. And it's a bit like why I do the book. And I keep a little running list of crazy technologies and stuff that I'd like to just write about because it's fun. And what was one I saw in the news today about somebody saying that we should mine the moon or something like that. Apparently that's going to solve climate change. But I keep a bit of a
forget about how much energy is going to cost us to get to the moon.
Well, actually, that is one of the chapters actually I cover when I wrote about, because I did the calculations as to, well, how much oxygen and hydrogen, and I put the calculation in there and I put it on the internet and said, can someone come and challenge me on this? Because somebody needs to come and pick my maths apart, because I can't believe it's true. But actually I was looking at, at what point does space travel become a problem? And it's actually quite small at the moment, because there's actually relatively very little of it. But I thought it was really interesting. I was thinking, we're all celebrating launching these things into space. How much does it take to get these things to space? And it's a lot of energy. Interestingly, actually, it's a lot of energy that you could use green energy for, because it tends to be pure hydrogen and pure oxygen. Actually, you don't have to. You can. That is a source of energy which you can make in a green way relatively easily. But yeah, so yes, that's it. I would say keeping current, and I think that would be.
I'm going to ask you a question now, John, and I think you've already answered this anyway, and you're going to probably elaborate more on it. But is there something you can give back to our industry today regarding a takeaway? And I think this is really, it could be keep yourself current. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're an organization, an energy expert within that sector. Keeping yourself current is going to support you, but is there anything else that you can think?
Yeah, I'd say keeping current, but also keep the numbers in mind. So when there's numbers in energy which really help articulate a story and tell people what you're doing. And so actually being able to just know, how many kilowatts would a typical office building use per square meter? So if you work with offices, how many kilowatts would I be expecting here? Like actually knowing that a typical house uses about 4,500 kilowatt hours a year, or I know there's lots of sources of those numbers, but just having a feel for those with the numbers. Actually, well, how much carbon is that? That's so knowing that driving a car around for 10,000 miles a year is about a ton of CO2, or just having a feel, and globally the global CO2 emissions are about 60 billion tons. So actually half of that comes from coal. How much? And I think it's just really important to get a feel for those numbers, so that when you talk about a new technology, you can actually just get a feel for, well, what's the real potential of this here? What are we really talking?
Yeah.
I think that flows through. And we talked early on about this onion of the very local problem that somebody has that wants to get their costs down, and then you end up back in a you end up making a solar panel somewhere the other side of the earth. I think it's really important just to have a feel for those numbers and the impact, and actually just be able to talk to people in a way that helps them understand those numbers too, and that we all get really comfortable talking about carbon and kilowatts.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And I think that's my big takeaway.
You cannot manage what you don't measure, so we need those figures, so we can start
absolutely.
to manage and advise on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that becomes more and more important as the system becomes more integrated and more complicated. So when we talk about EV charging, is a great example, isn't it? And I keep seeing articles where people saying, "Oh, it's costing a fortune to charge out there," and the sort of naysayers saying, "Oh, it's all these EV people, they must be having a nightmare because it's costing them £1 a kilowatt," and all that. And I think, well, I don't recognize the number because I've never paid that much. But also, 95% of my personal charging is done at home for 10 pence a kilowatt overnight with a time, and I think it's so important that people in the energy industry challenge those assumptions about carbon intensity and price. And is it challenge, or is it just be aware so that they can have really strong conversations? And that way, through the numbers, you get context. Yeah. And then when you stay current, you can look at it and you can make a judgment, and you can say, "Yeah, I get that, but that's not actually that big a number, is it?" Yeah, I get what you're selling, but it's not going to make a lot of difference. Or actually, wow, that's amazing. That's a cool technology. That's where we want to be. That's it. That's where I want to be. So and that's it for me. So stay current, keep on top of the numbers.
Brilliant. John, it's been a really pleasure speaking with you. I'll just lastly, how can we read more about your blogs? Do you post them obviously on LinkedIn, but have you got your own website?
I've got my own website. So I post them on there, johnarmstrong.co.uk, and then I because I've been focusing a little bit on the books. Actually, I've blogged a bit less just because I've started crafting chapters. So, but also I share some interesting stuff on LinkedIn when I can. And then also the books are on Amazon and can be ordered wherever, really. All good bookstores, I think, is the phrase.
We'll make sure we promote that, because you're putting the messages out, and I think that's really important. And you're keeping everyone current, which is superb. You're taking your time to keep yourself current, and then you feed that on it. So that's a brilliant sort of thing or legacy that you're providing through your website.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it, and thank you for reaching out, Paul, as well. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm really glad you've enjoyed the book. And I'll definitely be more than happy to come back and talk about what I've changed as we go into the next one, and how much I was surprised by the next 12 months. We
do keep this moving, so we would like to interview you again, and we'll pick another subject. We won't get bogged down with the CHP next time.
I don't mind. I love it. Mechanical engineer. I love it. It's great. That's the whole point. It's the great thing about energy. You can jump down a rabbit hole and enjoy it.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you soon. And you and your family, stay safe in these times.